She told me, "Don't ask questions, just trust me tonight." I didn't know what to expect, but I knew everything was about to change. The city buzzed quietly outside, neon lights flickering softly through the rain-speckled window pane. I was standing there, a little out of place in my usual routine, watching the world go on as if nothing had changed. My life had been comfortably predictable: work, home, the occasional night out with friends. Nothing extraordinary, nothing to stir the restless part inside me. Then she appeared. I first noticed her across the room. Her presence was impossible to miss. She moved with a quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't shout but simply demands attention. She was older than me by more than a decade, but her age only added to the way she carried herself. Graceful, poised, yet with a softness around the edges that hinted at stories untold. Her hair caught the dim light, and when her eyes met mine, there was something there, a flicker of recognition, or maybe a challenge. I had admired her from a distance for months. There was something about her that felt untouchable, like she belonged to a different world. I told myself not to imagine too much, that it was better to keep things simple. But tonight was different. She approached me, calm and deliberate, her heels clicking softly on the floor. When she stood close enough, I could see the subtle warmth in her eyes and the faintest smile playing at the corners of her lips. The space between us felt charged, like the moment before a storm. "Don't ask questions," she said, her voice low and steady. "Just trust me tonight." Her words sent a shiver through me, unexpected and electric. I wasn't sure if it was fear or excitement, or maybe both. The invitation hung in the air like a secret promise, and even though my mind was swirling with doubts and curiosity, I felt the pull to say yes. The brush of her hand against mine was fleeting, almost accidental, but it burned with meaning. Her touch was warm, reassuring, yet carried an edge of something mysterious. It was a moment suspended in time, a silent exchange that said more than words ever could. I swallowed hard, tried to steady the sudden rush of emotions. My heartbeat quickened, louder than the distant city sounds, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, a subtle blend of jasmine and something earthier like rain-soaked wood. It grounded me, made me want to take the leap even though the path was unknown. She turned back toward the door with a quiet grace, waiting for me to follow. The challenge in her eyes was unmistakable. I hesitated, caught between caution and the desire to break free from the familiar. Then I stepped forward. That night marked the first step into a story I wasn't ready for, but couldn't resist. A night where trust would be the only map, and the questions I feared to ask would remain unspoken, at least for now. The door closed softly behind us, muffling the distant sounds of the city and sealing us in a quieter world. It was a place unfamiliar to me. Her space, her sanctuary, and everything about it whispered stories I hadn't yet been invited to hear. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and old books, comforting yet mysterious, like a secret waiting to unfold. She didn't say much. There was no need. Her presence alone filled the room, steady and calm, like a gentle tide pulling me in deeper. I followed her without hesitation, though my mind was buzzing with questions I dared not voice. "Don't ask," she had said, and somehow I found myself willing to surrender to that simple, strange command. The faint glow of candlelight flickered on the walls, casting soft shadows that danced between us. The warm amber light softened her features, revealing a vulnerability I hadn't seen before, a slight tremble in her hands, the way her eyes briefly looked away. It made her feel more human, more real, and somehow more approachable. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers curling gently around mine. The touch was deliberate but tender, as if she was anchoring me to the present. I could feel the pulse of her skin beneath my palm, steady and reassuring, and it calmed the restless thrum inside me. We moved through the room with quiet ease, neither of us needing to fill the silence with words. The air between us was thick with anticipation, a fragile tension that lingered just beneath the surface. Every glance, every brush of skin spoke volumes, more than either of us dared to say aloud. At one point, she paused and looked up at me, her eyes searching mine with a mix of hope and hesitation. I wanted to ask what she was thinking, to unravel the mystery she had become, but I swallowed the question back down. Tonight wasn't about answers. It was about trust. Instead, I simply squeezed her hand, a silent promise that I was here, that I was willing to follow wherever this night might lead. She smiled then, a small, almost shy curve of her lips, and it felt like an invitation to step further into the unknown. There was something incredibly brave in that moment, her willingness to ask for trust and my decision to give it. The room grew quieter. The only sounds are steady breathing and the soft rustle of fabric as we settled near a window. Outside, the city lights blinked like distant stars, indifferent to the fragile connection growing inside. I could feel the heat of her body close beside me, the gentle rise and fall of her breath mingling with my own. It was intimate and tentative, like the first flicker of a flame before it becomes a steady fire. For the first time that night, I stopped trying to control the story, to predict what would happen next. Instead, I let myself be here, present and open, trusting her lead, trusting the silence, trusting that sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones left unspoken. The room was softly lit, shadows pooling in the corners, making the space feel like a quiet refuge from the outside world. We settled into worn armchairs that seemed to remember better days, the kind of furniture that invited long conversations, or the silence between them. The air was thick with a delicate tension, but it felt safe, like a fragile bubble where two very different people could finally let down their walls. She looked at me with an openness I hadn't expected, eyes steady but laced with the faintest trace of vulnerability. Slowly, in fragments, she began to share parts of herself, pieces she usually kept locked away. Her voice was low, almost hesitant at first, then growing steadier as she found trust in my silence. She spoke of moments tinged with regret, of dreams deferred and chances missed. There was a sadness wrapped in her words, but it wasn't despair. It was acceptance. The kind of quiet strength that comes from knowing pain, but choosing not to be defined by it. I listened, feeling the weight of her story settle around us like a warm blanket. She didn't ask for sympathy or solutions. She just needed someone to bear witness. And in that moment, I realized how rare and precious that kind of trust was. My own defenses softened. I let my fingers brush lightly against hers, a subtle touch that said, without words, "I see you. I'm here." She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand relaxed into mine, fingers entwining softly. The contact was gentle, electric in its simplicity. The scent of her, something faintly floral with a hint of something wild and untamed, lingered close. Her breath was steady, but every now and then a slight catch betrayed the depth of her emotions beneath the calm exterior. I wanted to reach out, to ease whatever hurt lingered, but I held back, knowing this was her journey. Between her words, we shared quiet moments where nothing needed to be said. The crackle of a fireplace somewhere beyond the room filled the silence, and outside, the night stretched endlessly. The dim light caught the curve of her cheekbone, the soft sweep of her hair brushing against her neck. She shifted slightly, leaning in, her shoulder brushing against mine. It was a small, unspoken invitation, and I welcomed it without hesitation. The closeness brought a warmth that wasn't just physical. It was the comfort of two souls inching closer through shared vulnerability. Our eyes met again, and this time there was a flicker of something new. Hope, maybe. Not the flashy spark of infatuation, but a slow, steady light that promised more. It was fragile, unspoken, and yet profoundly real. I wanted to ask the questions bubbling in my mind about her past, about what she wanted from me, from us, but I held back. Trust meant letting her set the pace. For now, it was enough to be here, to listen, to feel this delicate thread of connection weaving between us. As the night deepened, so did the quiet intimacy. It wasn't the kind of romance shouted from rooftops, but a gentle, unfolding story told in stolen glances, shared silences, and the tender brush of hands. This was the moment when the layers began to peel back. Not all at once, but just enough to see the person beneath and to feel the possibility of something real. The room seemed to shrink around us, the space between becoming a fragile thread pulled taut with all the things neither of us dared say. Words felt too loud, too heavy tonight. Instead, the silence spoke volumes, carrying the weight of unspoken questions, hesitant hopes, and desires cloaked in caution. Her eyes found mine again, but this time there was something different, something unguarded, as if the wall she'd kept so carefully constructed had started to crack, letting a glimpse of raw longing slip through. She looked away quickly, a blush coloring her cheeks, but I caught the way her gaze lingered just a moment too long when she thought I wasn't watching. I was drawn to her like a moth to a flickering flame, captivated by the tension simmering beneath every glance, every half-smile. My fingers twitched, aching to reach out, to bridge the distance that felt both small and impossible. Yet the space between us held its own kind of intimacy, the quiet electricity of almost touching. There was a moment when our hands hovered near each other, suspended in that delicious limbo between what was and what could be. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin, a magnetic pull that made my breath catch. Our fingers brushed, not quite a touch, but close enough to send a spark racing through me. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand trembled slightly, a silent confession of the same yearning I felt. Neither of us spoke. It felt like saying anything would break the fragile spell we were wrapped in. Instead, we shared small gestures, a breath held too long, a glance stolen and quickly averted, the way her body leaned just a little closer as if seeking something unspoken. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands, the soft catch in her breath whenever our eyes met. There was a vulnerability beneath her poised exterior that she rarely allowed herself to show. And yet, here in this quiet space, it felt safe enough to let it surface. I want to tell her everything I was feeling, the ache of wanting more, the fear of crossing a line we couldn't uncross. But words felt clumsy, inadequate. So I stayed silent, letting the tension speak for us both. In that moment, the room was filled with a tender kind of longing, fragile, restrained, but undeniably real. It was the kind of connection that didn't need grand declarations or sweeping gestures. It lived in the pauses, in the space between breaths, in the electric brush of near touch. Her eyes searched mine again, as if asking a question she wasn't ready to voice. I answered with a slow, gentle nod, a silent promise that I was here, that I was willing to wait, to let things unfold in their own time. The night stretched on, a slow dance of emotions held just beneath the surface. And though nothing had been said aloud, the unspoken desires between us burned brighter than any words ever could. The delicate tension that had lingered between us all night finally began to shift, like the first thaw after a long winter. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, no grand confession or cinematic gesture, but something quieter, something more profound. A soft breaking of walls built from years of caution and unspoken fears. She looked at me differently now. Her eyes held a new openness, less guarded and more vulnerable, as if she had been waiting for permission to lower her defenses. And somehow, in that moment, I realized I was the one who could give it. Without thinking, my hand lifted slowly, trembling just slightly, and I brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The warmth of her skin beneath my fingertips sent a ripple through me, an electric connection, grounding and intimate. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her breath mingling with mine in the quiet space between us. Her fingers found my hand, holding it gently but firmly. It was a gesture that spoke louder than words, a silent agreement that this fragile, unspoken bond was no longer just a possibility, but something real. I felt the weight of trust settling on my shoulders, heavy and beautiful. Then, emboldened by the moment, I spoke softly, sharing a piece of myself I rarely revealed. I told her about the parts of me I kept hidden, the fears that shadowed my days, the loneliness that sometimes crept in when no one was watching. I saw her eyes soften, reflecting empathy and a quiet strength that made me want to keep opening up. She didn't rush me or try to fix what I shared. Instead, she just listened, really listened, the way you do when someone hands you their heart and trusts you not to break it. In her presence, I felt seen, understood, and more alive than I had in a long time. Her own walls began to crumble then, and she spoke, slowly, carefully, about her past, the heartbreaks and regrets that shaped her. There was no bitterness, only honesty and a willingness to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. As she spoke, I reached for her, my hand sliding up to rest gently on her cheek. The softness of her skin beneath my palm was grounding, a reassurance that we were both real, both here. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, and when she opened them again, there was a quiet acceptance, a surrender to something tender and true. We held each other then, not out of urgency or passion, but because it felt right, because it was the first time we could simply be ourselves without fear or pretense. Her arms wrapped around me with a gentle strength, her cheek resting lightly against my chest, and for a moment, I felt the steady beat of her heart, slow, sure, and full of quiet hope. That embrace was more than just a physical touch. It was a bridge over the gap between our pasts and the unknown future, a promise that we would face whatever came next together. In breaking the barrier between us, we had opened the door to something fragile but real, a slow-burning connection built on trust, honesty, and the courage to be vulnerable. The night had deepened into something soft and still, as if the world outside had paused to give us this moment, an unspoken truce between past worries and future uncertainties. We sat close, side by side, the space between us smaller now, filled with a quiet comfort that neither of us needed to explain. She rested her head gently on my shoulder, the weight light, but full of meaning. I felt the slow, steady rhythm of her breath against my skin, a soothing cadence that seemed to quiet the restless thoughts swirling in my mind. The worries that had chased me here, the questions I wanted to ask, the doubts I tried to push away, melted into the background, replaced by a calm acceptance. Her fingers found mine, curling softly around my hand in a touch so simple, yet so profound. It wasn't a demand or a plea, but a quiet offering, a reminder that trust was more than just words. It was presence. I squeezed her hand gently, letting her know I was here, fully present in this fragile bubble we had created together. The room around us seemed to glow with a warm amber light, the kind that softens edges and blurs harsh lines. Outside, the city lights flickered through the window, casting delicate shadows that danced quietly across her face. In the dimness, I noticed the faint rise and fall of her chest, the delicate curve of her cheek pressed against my arm. There was no need for conversation anymore. The questions I had held back, the ones about why she had asked me to trust her without answers, no longer mattered. Tonight, we had something rarer than clarity, the gift of simply being together without explanation or expectation. I could feel the warmth of her body close to mine, the gentle brush of her hair against my neck, and the softness of her breath mingling with mine in the cool night air. It was a closeness that transcended words, a shared silence that spoke of acceptance and peace. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to fix or understand everything. I let myself lean into the unknown, finding comfort in the trust she had asked for and the quiet surrender I was willing to give. She shifted slightly, tightening her grip on my hand, a small but powerful gesture that said everything she couldn't or wouldn't say aloud. And I responded with a smile, the kind that comes from the heart and lingers long after the moment passes. The night stretched before us like an open canvas, full of possibilities yet untouched by doubt. We didn't need to rush or demand answers. For now, this fragile piece was enough. As I looked down at her resting there beside me, I realized that sometimes love isn't about knowing every detail or having all the answers. Sometimes it's about trust, about presence, about embracing the quiet moments when two souls simply exist together, unhurried, unguarded, and deeply connected. And in that stillness, I felt something new stirring inside me. Hope. The first light of dawn crept softly through the curtains, casting a pale glow across the room that felt like a whispered promise. The city outside was just beginning to stir, cars humming faintly, distant footsteps echoing. But inside, time seemed to hold its breath. The night's quiet intimacy lingered like a fragile thread connecting us, unbroken and tender. She still rested against me, the warmth of her body a steady comfort as the world shifted from darkness to light. In the soft morning haze, her features looked even more vulnerable, her eyes half closed, lashes resting lightly against her cheeks, a small crease of peacefulness settling between her brows. It was a side of her I rarely saw, the quiet and unguarded self she allowed me to witness now. For a moment, words felt unnecessary. We existed in that space between sleep and wakefulness, where the past felt distant and the future remained unwritten. The silence was not empty. It was full of unspoken understanding and the steady beating of two hearts finding their rhythm. When she stirred and opened her eyes, our gazes met, a look that held everything we hadn't said the night before. There was no need for promises or declarations, just a gentle acknowledgement of what had begun between us. In that look, I saw gratitude, hope, and an invitation to walk this uncertain path together. I reached for her hand, my fingers brushing hers with a softness that echoed the tenderness of the night. She squeezed back lightly, her touch a quiet reassurance that this moment was real, that it wasn't just a fleeting escape, but a beginning. As the room filled with the soft glow of morning, I felt a shift inside myself, a release of old fears and the stirring of something new. The hesitation and doubt that had clouded my thoughts all night started to lift, replaced by a calm determination to embrace whatever came next. We rose slowly, moving in gentle rhythm as if learning a new dance. There was no rush, no need to fill the space with noise or explanation. Just a simple act of being together, step by step, as the world outside woke up around us. The promise wasn't about forever or certainty. It was about presence, about choosing to trust, to be vulnerable, and to cherish the quiet moments that build the foundation for something lasting. As she stood beside me, her hand slipping into mine with a natural ease, I realized how much had changed in just one night. The distance between us, once defined by years and fears, had softened into something tender and true. The dawn wasn't just the start of a new day. It was the start of a new chapter for both of us. One written not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with trust, respect, and a slow-burning connection that promised to grow. And as we stepped out into the morning light, side by side, I knew this was only the beginning of a story that neither of us could have predicted, but both of us were ready to write together.